that's what the success of a movement like New Atheism consists in the fact that all they had to do was just tell other people why they're wrong. You only need to poke holes in other people's clothes. But if you need to like sew your own shirt, that gets a little more difficult. C.S. Lewis said that the purpose of philosophy is not the cutting down of forests, but the irrigation of deserts.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I've thought about this for a good while. The seductiveness of being a critic as opposed to being somebody that makes suggestions, and the lack of preparedness of anybody to put forward any proposals for anything. It's easy for both sides accuse each other of being reactionary, right? The reactionary right, the reactionary left.
Yeah.
And ultimately, for instance, perfect example of this is in the world of dating and sort of mate selection in the mating market. Everybody can provide criticisms about what's going wrong, and almost nobody provides any actionable steps to improve it beyond something that is eliminative rather than additive, right? Like, well, if we could just stop doing this, then this would be fixed. It's like, I don't think that that's quite the way that it works. And there's another very unique protection mechanism that's given, which is it's very hard to criticize someone's criticism, or at least being a critic leaves you open to criticism way less than being a proposer.
Oh, yeah.
Right. If I put something forward, if I posit a potential solution, for you to be able to come back and say, well, this is shit, and this is shit, and this is shit, makes complete. It's very easy to do. Whereas for you to say, for me to critique what you did, and then for you to come back and go, well, actually this and this and this about, it's like, it kind of gets all a little bit abstract, and it's a few degrees removed from anything that feels real.
Yeah. Simon Cowell can't write a song. Like if the world was full of Simon Cowells, then we'd end up with no music. Somebody's got to do the building here. You can't just be a critic. And this is what I think has been the reason for the success of the sort of anti-New Atheist stuff that we've been seeing recently. I mean, you'll have seen this. Even the New Atheists themselves sort of treat it like it's a dead animal, and in many ways it is. And I think it's got to do with the fact that, yeah, they've done a very good job of cutting down the central pillar of what has traditionally been the reason for people getting out of bed in the morning. And then when people are there saying, well, what do we put in its place? Next? They're like, see ya. I'm out. And they go off and do different things. And what are people to do? And that's why...
Was it the job of the New Atheists to provide something to...
Well, maybe not. Some people are just good at diagnosing problems. Karl Marx is a good example. Karl Marx's diagnoses of the way the world works are fascinating to read and incredibly useful, even if you disagree with them. But obviously attempts to sort of build societies on those ideas alone have failed. It seems like you need something a little bit more. I just don't think it's true, the religion stuff, I mean. And so that's why I think we're seeing this, because people are beginning to realize that it probably isn't true. They can't quite get behind the truth claims, but they recognize that there's some utility in having other people believe that it is true. And I don't know where that leaves us, because in this discussion about whether religion is good or bad for society, I said yesterday, look, I will accept your premise wholesale that religion is good, maybe even necessary for society. What do you want me to do if I just don't think it's true? Am I just lie to my children? Raise them believing something that I don't believe is the case because I think it will somehow be beneficial to society? I don't think it works like that. I don't think people can actually fool themselves. Sure, you can act as if God exists, and that's what someone like Peterson says that people do already, but ultimately, if you just say, well, I think that, it should just act like a Christian because it's good for me, then when push comes to shove and you really have to make a moral sacrifice, if you're not actually a Christian, you're probably not going to do the actually Christian thing.
Well, I wonder whether this is afforded to people because of the convenience and comfort of modern life. The fact that having to really, really put something on the line, it's mostly LARPing as, belief systems and, I'll pick up that piece of trash and I will, give money to this person on the street.
Yes. Yeah, people have sort of forgotten. I mean,
it's like bourgeois religious belief.
It's so irregularly that we have to make genuine moral sacrifices of the kind that used to be commonplace throughout the history of humanity, that we've sort of forgotten our ability to do so. And I think that if you push people now, they recognize that they probably wouldn't make those sacrifices. Did you see the Mr. Beast poll where he asked, would you rather have like $1 million or like a random person on Earth dies or something like that if you press this button?
No.
And like, I think it might have been a majority of people, a slim majority, said they'd, press that button. Yeah, kill someone random. I'll take $1 million. And I actually kind of believe them. I think they actually would. And people want to say that that's because we've lost, our belief in God. I don't know. Maybe I think a better explanation is just that, like you say, we've become too comfortable. And so when somebody says, in other words, like, oh, well, this must be due to decline in religion and the fact that we've forgotten our Judeo-Christian heritage. I mean, you'll probably hear that a lot from people that you might talk to on this podcast. They'll say something like that. Just think to yourself, like, is that really the best explanation? Is that the only explanation? Could it be something to do with the growth of technology? Could it be to do with something to do with the growth of comfort?
Yeah.
And is it more likely to do with that? And maybe it's not the lack of religion that's causing the other stuff, but this other source that's causing both of those things.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot recently about stuff that is literally true but figuratively false, and figuratively true but literally false. And it kind of seems a little bit like the beliefs that you're talking about here. It may be comforting, increasing in happiness, adaptive to kind of act as if these things exist. The belief in free will, actually, believing in free will, determinism generally is something that may be literally true, but figuratively false.
Yes.
And that's kind of where I've come to as an opinion with this, that largely it's through designed ignorance that I just don't think about it that much.
Precisely the reason it evolved. That's why it exists as an illusion, because it does something for us. And that's fine. I've never had a problem saying that. But when the sort of auspices under which I'm having a conversation with Ben Shapiro is that he made a video called The Atheist Delusion. And in that video, he says, like, look, you can't have free will without God. I say, yeah, I agree. You can't have free will without God. You just also can't have it with God. And he essentially says, like, well, there's sort of I don't know how free will works, but it's sort of a mystery that I'm willing to accept wholesale. And I'm like, well, this is fine, but who's the delusory one here? You know what I mean? Like, I've got no problem with you saying, like, well, I see that, this is more Ben said, by the way, but I have no problem with somebody saying, well, yeah, I mean, maybe free will doesn't exist, but it's better to act as though it does. It's like, okay, fine, but then don't say that I'm the one acting under a delusion. I mean, delusions can be good. They might evolve for a good reason, but I don't know. I guess I find it difficult to treat something as true that isn't. It's a bit like the gun is always loaded. That's one of Brett Weinstein's examples. It's not true that the gun is always loaded, but we're just going to pretend that it is. And that's much better, at least for good society. If we always
literally
act like
false, but figuratively true.
But like, you can't actually act like it's true. Like, if you ask me to put money on, like, opening the gun and seeing if there's a bullet in there.
You can behave in a way that functions as if it were.
Yeah, but then when push comes to shove and you really need to make a decision, you're not going to be able to do it unless you really believe it's true.
So this only works in low stakes situations.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's all too easy to say, oh, we'll just sort of act as though it's true.
Good example here, using the act as if the gun is loaded thing. You do not point it at anybody. You do not leave it around the children. You do not do the rest of it. If a robber breaks into your house, you don't go downstairs with said gun acting as if it's loaded.
Exactly right. And so the moment that it actually really matters, like in the prior case, it only matters when it goes wrong, right? But when it begins to matter when it goes right, and that it goes right, this principle just doesn't work. And so I'm suspicious of its efficacy, in other words. I think we might need to actually start acting in accordance with what's true, which, by the way, is what people have been saying for a long time. Oh, why don't we all just act in accordance with what's true? And then suddenly when you begin to realize that maybe free will doesn't exist, maybe morality is just a social adaptation, suddenly this idea of acting in accordance with what's true as a point of principle goes out the window. And it's amazing how I sort of see deontologists, virtue ethicists transform before my very eyes into utilitarians. Out goes the principle of live in accordance with the truth. Out go the principles of honesty and sort of lack of intentional self-deception because, well, we want the greatest good for the greatest number. A better, more functional society comes about if we just pretend as though this is the case. What happened to the virtue? What happened to the principle? What happened to the deontological ethics? It's just out the window all of a sudden. I think sometimes people like to have their cake and eat it too in that respect. I like to act in accordance with what I think is true. And when somebody challenges me and says, well, you don't act as though you don't have free will, I just don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like. It probably looks something like this.